we have a joint, or rather a 3-day session. So two of the organizers are going to welcome all of you. That is
Yes.
myself and Dr. Rajashri Varadi from the Law Department, and our third organizer, third partner, Klaus Tierstoffer from Munster is going to be giving the valedictory remarks. So first of all, I know Rajashri is going to be welcoming all of us, but I would then ask her to speak first, and I'll speak later because I also want to then introduce the chair. Rajashri, will you please speak up?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Professor Klaus Christopher, Chair British Studies and Vice Dean of Philology, WW University of Munster. Today's chief guest, Mr. Pheroze Nowrojee, Senior Counsel, High Court of Kenya, and author. Commodore Shrikant Kesnur, Director, Maritime Warfare Center. My dear friend, Dr. Nilofer Bharucha, Director CoHaB IDC, Advocate Armin Vandrewala, my faculties from the Department of Law, Dr. Swati Rautela, Dr. Sanjay Jadhav, Dr. Sridhar Munde, Mrs. Alka Patil, Mrs. Deepali Patil, Mr. Setia, Dr. D.K. Sonawane, principals of law colleges, Dr. Kavita Lal Chandani, Dr. Madhura Kalmalkar, in charge principal Kevin Toro, Dr. Shilpi Jha, Dr. Gaikwad, Miss Preeti, eminent guests from Australia and New Zealand, members of the bar and bench, distinguished guests from abroad and India, students of the law department and other university departments and law colleges and other colleges at national and international level. We are indeed thankful to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Suhas Pednekar sir, under whose leadership we are able to organize such unique program. I am really grateful to our Honorable Vice Chancellor who has encouraged us to initiate such kind of activities. Distinguished guest, there is a deep-rooted relations between India and South Africa. Our father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhiji, had contributed his social commitment in South Africa, and therefore I welcome most kind and generous personality, Mr. Pheroze Nowrojee, Senior Counsel, High Court of Kenya and author. Today he will deliver his milestone speech on the topic of law and literature and the Indian diaspora in colonial Africa. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation. I also express my sincere feelings in welcoming great personality of unlimited wisdom and experience, uh, Commodore Shrikant Kesnur, Director, Maritime Warfare Center, and Officer in Command, Naval History Project. Sir is renowned for his academic commitment. I am sure his speech recreate everlasting impact on the audience. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation to chair this session. We are also thankful to Dr. Professor Ravindra Kulkarni sir, Pro Vice Chancellor of University of Mumbai, who has been proactive in initiating various academic activities. It is due to his strong support we are able to conduct this program. I am delighted to welcome Professor Klaus Christopher, Chair British Studies and Vice Dean of Philology, WW University of Munster. Sir has been a pioneer source for visualizing and materializing academic research projects like law and literature. I am also welcoming a great and dynamic academic resource person, Dr. Nilofer Bharucha, Director of CoHaB IDC. I am indeed thankful to my dear friend, Madam Nilofer, for collaborating such a unique academic project with the Department of Law, University of Mumbai. I also appreciate Mrs. Kirti, a research scholar,
Paddy,
for
Paddy,
her excellent coordination and sincere efforts for organizing this program. I appreciate presence of principals of law colleges of Mumbai and across the state, despite of their busy schedule for their graceful presence. Thank you, Dr. Kavita Lal Chandani, for gracing this occasion. Last but not the least, my dear teaching faculty and all dear students who have shown their sincere and keen interest in attending this program, special welcome to all of them. Literature, both in Africa and India, plays a crucial role in growth and development of law. There is interdisciplinary relationship between law and literature, both in India and Africa. Today, we will get a thorough understanding of the same after listening the intellectual thoughts of Pheroze Nowrojee sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajeshri, for your welcome. I will just add a few words to Rajeshri's very comprehensive welcome. She has welcomed everyone, and she has also included in the welcome us, the co-organizers, for which I'm
Of
very
course.
thankful, Rajeshri. Uh, we are, as she said, we are grateful that we had the Vice Chancellor last month flagging of this project, where Armin gave us the inaugural speech, and at which most of our invited guests, and I'm sure the faculty and students of the law department were also there. And we are very happy that this kind of a strong connection has built up between law and literature already through the second lecture itself. And before I hand over charge to Commodore Shrikant Kesnu, who will be chairing Pheroze Nowrojee's lecture, I would first of all like to formally introduce the Commodore. I know that Rajeshri has said quite a few things, and we know that he is the director of the I'm sorry, I'm going through it again, but I would just like to read out the very brief and very modest bio note that the Commodore has sent to us. He is an alumnus of the prestigious National Defense Academy and was commissioned in the Indian Navy in July 1986. In his 34-year-plus career, he has had extensive experience in maritime operations, training, leadership, diplomacy, management, administration, mentoring, and communication. He has been the captain of 2 frontline ships, and in addition, his tours of duty have witnessed several important assignments, prestigious courses, and interesting tenures at sea, ashore, and abroad. He has a PhD from Mumbai University, apart from 5 postgraduate degrees in science and social sciences, of which MA History and MPhil have been from Mumbai University. He has been lead writer and chief editor of 9 books and many journals for the Indian Navy. He has been involved with several academic, creative, and corporate outreach endeavors of the Navy, and he's presently the director, what I was searching for at the beginning, presently the director of Maritime Warfare Center. Quite frightening that, Commodore Sir, for us poor civilians, but we are happy we are in safe hands with you in charge of the Warfare Center. And in addition is also the officer in charge of the Naval History Project. Specific to Africa, this I would like to specifically pay attention to. He was a defense advisor at the High Commission of India based in Nairobi, Kenya, from October 2008 to March 2012, with Kenya, Tanzania, Seychelles, Eritrea, and Somalia as his areas of responsibility. During the course of this tenure or earlier, he also has visited Egypt, Mauritius, Uganda, Reunion Island, and South Africa. As part of his diplomatic assignment, he also got to interact with authorities in Comoros, Congo, and Mozambique. These assignments helped him to get a ringside view of several developments in Africa, especially East Africa, at that important phase in their journey. Continuing with his interest and affection for the region, he subsequently undertook his doctorate studies on how defense diplomacy as a key activity could enable enhanced cooperation between India and East Africa at the Department of African Studies in Mumbai University, where at a lecture I got to first meet the Commodore. And it was very interesting that our first encounter at one of these meetings was full of squalls and thunder and high seas, which later on calmed down, and we got to, I think, appreciate one another more than we did at that first squally kind of encounter, to carry on with the naval sea imagery, sir. And the Commodore regularly takes part and speaks on issues pertaining to India and Africa, especially in the field of defense cooperation and maritime diplomacy. I now leave this particular session where Mr. Pheroze Nowrojee is going to give the lecture in the hands of Commodore Shrikant Kesno. Sir. You are muted.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Professor Nilofer. That was very generous introduction. Indeed, beginning with the sparks that flew when we first met, and the stormy seas. But I think that was memorable simply because I saw that there were a lot of things that we could talk and take it further. That was incidentally the farewell for Professor Aparajita Biswas, who's been my PhD guide. So anyway, Professor Nilofer, Professor Rajeshri, Professor Claus, Advocate Armin, all the professors, dignitaries, above all, our chief guest, Pheroze Nowrojee, a most eminent person. I don't really think I can speak a lot about him. I'm just delighted to be here today. But I'm so sort of honored and privileged that I have been given this opportunity to chair this, because very frankly, despite whatever the laundry list of things written there, I'm frankly an outlier when I'm in the sort of legal disciplines or amongst academics and amongst writers and literary people. I probably bring more prosaic concerns of history or maritime operations or war fighting to the beautiful world of art and humanities. So I'm an outlier, and I'm so thankful to have been given this opportunity to not just listen to Pheroze, but also to chair today's events. Thank you. Thanks to all the authorities, to CoHaB IDC, to the Law Department, to the Mumbai University, and to the collaborators from abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, I really do not know what to say. Yes, I have extensive experience of Africa and East Africa particularly. But I guess the topic is very fascinating for various reasons. We all live in what is called a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary age. We constantly invoking interdisciplinary, the word, and fitting it into a lot of our discussions these days. But even so, by that yardstick, I found this topic of law, literature in colonial Africa coming together as a very sort of fascinating combination of themes, which raises a lot of curiosity about what might happen. How would the speaker sort of take this very challenging subject and what he might say? I mean, from beginning, we have, of course, known about the sort of relationship that exists between law and literature. Professor Rajeshri brought it out. But in a more simple sense, I guess it began for many of us when we read the Perry Mason novels in our childhood, the earliest sort of association between law and literature. And we remembered by heart so many things that Perry Mason would argue in the courts. And then, of course, as you go through your journey, because law relates itself so closely to human condition and to human dilemmas, I guess the fact that law would sort of go hand in hand with literature is a given, and some of the best judgments, some of the best critiques, some of our leading political debates are anchored in law, and therefore it's quite natural to see law and literature going together. Even when people are defying law, as in say colonial times or something, it was done with rare eloquence. For example, Bal Gangadhar Tilak's defense when he was sentenced, and so many such instances. Diaspora and literature also go very close hand in hand, because the themes of displacement, dislocation, of journeying to different lands, the journey itself, of adjusting and adapting to different cultures there, of wondering where you fit in, and if you are indeed going to far off places in different cultures, how would you fit in, and where do you fit in, and what are the dynamics of your relation with the people there. That, of course, as we have seen, a huge amount of diaspora literature all over the world, and some of the best books have been written. I'd be preaching to the converted if I talk to a bunch of literary people about diaspora literature. So yes, that is another place where there's lots of literature. And when we talk of colonial, then colonial diaspora brings its own sorts of, let's say, a subtext or a subset of literature as to how did the Indian diaspora fare. Were they the colonizing force? Were they the colonized force? Often they were perhaps somewhere in between. Sometimes they were a part of the great British enterprise. Sometimes they went as individual tradesmen on their own, as mavericks, mercenaries, or whatever, for their own fortune. How did they fare? And all of that lends itself to very fascinating stories, very fascinating landscapes, which in turn gives rise to lots of literature in itself. But how would sort of all of them meld together? How would they come together? And where would they come in colonial East Africa or in Kenya? I was very fascinated with this, because you sort of bring 3 or 4 strands together and try to see if there is a coherent story that you can pick up from that. And I think the person who answers to all these descriptions, law, literature, diaspora, and colonial Africa, is our chief guest for today, Pheroze Nowrojee. So he is, I mean, as the title itself says, he's a man of many parts, and he answers to all these descriptions. But I thought, I'm sure that the biodata has been circulated. I thought I'll read out some aspects of his biodata and then say a little bit more. Now, I can't claim to say I'm a friend of Pheroze's, but there has been a bit of acquaintance, and I'll tell a little bit about that later. But very briefly, ladies and gentlemen, Pheroze is a senior counsel. He's an advocate of High Court of Kenya, Tanzania, and Zanzibar. He's also appeared in Seychelles and Uganda. So he was born in Diaspora in Nairobi, and he's studied in India. His graduation was in this very own Mumbai University. He was called to the bar in Lincoln's Inn in London. Then he went to the Yale, the prestigious Yale, for his LLM. So as far as law is concerned, I guess he's touched the Holy Grail and done a lot of that. But he's also hugely awarded. His many awards include the International Commission of Jurists in Kenya, the ICJ Jurist of the Year, the International Bar Association, the Bernard Simons Human Rights Prize in 2002 and 2004, the Law Society of Kenya Roll of Honor, the Maasai People Safeguarding Rights Award, and the C.B. Madan Constitution Prize. Now, Pheroze has been, diaspora since 1896, and that year is important because that's the start of the Uganda Railway. And he's also been awarded the Bharatiya Pravasi Samman Award in 2007 by India. He's been given the South Asian Studies Council's annual Gandhi Lecture at Yale at 2017. And this is particularly fascinating because for people who meet Pheroze would see the huge amount of physical resemblance between Gandhi and Pheroze. I'm sure he's heard that many times. but it's uncanny. I mean, if I were to make a movie as Richard Attenborough, I would give the role straight away to Pheroze. And he's also an author. He's author of Kenyan Journey, an examination of diaspora in East Africa, and of Dukawala. Dukawala is a shopkeeper in Swahili, of short stories set in Kenya. Interestingly, he's also BBC Africa Poetry Competition prize winner, so which tells you that his writings are not simply about musings or about serious stuff like law, but also poetry. Now, having said that, ladies and gentlemen, this is like with many good people, this is just simply the skeletal framework, and perhaps one ought to fill a little bit of flesh and blood in this. And I'll try and attempt to do it from my knowledge of Pheroze. I could be a little up and down here and there, but I'll try and give you a sense of what Pheroze the person is. And I'd like to highlight three things there. The first, of course, is that he has this huge range of achievements, of course. But I think the impression that I got when I interacted with people in Kenya, including the High Commission, is a person of enormous stature. You know, Pheroze is not just respected as a legal luminary or for his legal acumen, but as a champion of human rights, as champion of several good causes, and he's considered a sort of a senior statesman, if I can say so. I mean, when he speaks, people, even those who sort of differ with him or who may be in a different political tent, listen to him with lots of attention because he has the kind of stature of a senior statesman. He's considered in many ways to be a voice of the good or a force for good. And I saw that consistently anywhere, that when you just simply invoke the name Pheroze Nowrojee, there was a kind of, a huge amount of respect, or the way we say in the armed forces that when we just think of someone great and we say salute. So it's like that was the reaction of a lot of people when you took his name, not just in the Indian Embassy, of course in the Indian Embassy because of his stature as a Pravasiya Bharati winner, because of a whole lot of causes that he did. He was a highly revered guest, but across people in Kenya, in Africa, East Africa, when you spoke, I think his name stood out for scholarship, for his acumen, for the causes he fought for, and most importantly for the virtues and values that he brought to the public life and as a sort of role model. I think that is very, very important, and that sort of set him apart. The second is that notwithstanding his great range of achievements, he wears them very, very lightly. I mean, if you meet him and speak to him, he is so full of curiosity. He has a childlike interest. He has very sparkling eyes, and he's always telling you, he's sort of so open to hearing things, to listening to people, to what others say, to hearing other points of view. So that makes him, you would expect a big lawyer to be always in the speaking mode, but I think he's a great listener. He's a fabulous listener, and he kind of makes any person feel nice when you're talking to him, and that's a very delightful thing about him. The third one, at a very personal level, of course, he's interested not just in this, he's interested in history, he's interested in music, in food, whole lot of things. But he's also extraordinarily generous. And like I said, I'm not a close friend, I'm an acquaintance perhaps, but he has lavished lots of generosity, including on me. And I must sort of give a personal anecdote here, that when he came to know I was there, that I was interested in history and the Uganda rail history. One fine day, I was surprised to see him come to my house with a big plate, which is the number plate of one of the earliest trains that formed the Uganda Railway. I mean, that's a collector's prize, the collector's piece. If I had that, I would loathe giving that to anyone. But here was Pheroze so generously and saying that, look, my grandfather drove this wagon and I'm giving that to you, including with lawyerly meticulousness, a note about the engine wagon. So that tells both his eye for detail and the sort of generosity. Knowing my interest in movies, he also presented me a book on Bollywood film posters. But the lawyer in him could not resist from saying, it's a long loan. You can keep it for as long as you want. So making me aware that I had to return it sometime, but also assuring me that I could keep it. So but that's Pheroze, lovely twinkling eyes, great humor, always something interesting to say. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to stand between you and Pheroze, or I think we all will look forward to hearing what he has to say. I really am keen to hear him, and it's great. In this new normal, we're making our acquaintance online, but it's great to be able to hear and to listen to him. So Pheroze, thanks a lot for being, on behalf of all the organizers, if I can personally thank you for accepting this invite, and over to you. We're all waiting to listen to you.
Thank you, Srikant. And Srikant is a long-time good friend from Nairobi days, and it's a delight. We've met earlier a few years back at another conference, and here we are together again. Thank you, Chair. May I also thank my co-hosts, Professor Kulkarni for the University of Bombay, Professor Barucha, Professor Varhadi, and Professor Stierstoffer as my co-hosts, to say thank you to the first speaker, Armin Vanrewala, to say thank you to the presence of very distinguished participants here, and to many, many old friends among the participants, and always to be glad to come back to my old university. So thank you all. I'm speaking today on law, literature, and the Indian diaspora in colonial Africa. Long ago, W.H. Auden wrote, of the many definitions of poetry, the simplest is still the best. It is memorable words. That is to say, it must move our emotions or excite our intellect, for only that which is moving or exciting is memorable, and the stimulus is the audible word and cadence, to which in all its power of suggestion and incantation, we must surrender. It seems to me this is also a good definition of what we term the literature of the law. And for the same reasons, such words in the law have stayed with us because they move us, excite our intellect. They move us with their reminder and their affirmation of our public and our private aspirations, and we return to them often because we need in the practice of our profession, law and writing, the sustenance they give us of intellectual persistence, the continuity of our ideals, and the inspiriting of the will. The literature of the law is by judges and lawyers. The literature about the law is by writers, some of whom may also happen to be lawyers, though we also put the latter in the first group. But those in the second group, the ones who write about the law, do not necessarily admire the subjects about which they write. Thus, Dickens, for example, wrote a lot about the law. Most of it is fascinating, but most of it is unflattering. Writers from the empire and the diaspora fall in both the groups, but overwhelmingly in the latter, that's about the law. Thus, later, when we come to some examples, you may find not admiration, but a strong undercurrent of condemnation of the law and its processes. The Indian diaspora's political habitat was the British colony. The empire's experience for us was of legal authoritarianism and social humiliation. In response, diasporan literature has thus been largely polemical. It's disputatious because we are disputing the fundamental question: what are these people doing, ruling here? And the law in these colonies, because of these disputes, was largely of oppression. So diasporan literature of the law in the colonies was largely of defiance and of resistance to that oppression and its daily punishments, whether through the criminal process or extrajudicially or simply in social interaction. Throughout this lecture, you will see a very, very close connection between events in India, reactions in India, responses in India, and reactions, responses in the diaspora. And that is because we shared the same oppression. And because of that, not only were the connections similar in reaction, but India was a major, major influence on the diaspora all the time. And the major influences were the Gadar movement, the Arya Samaj, Gandhi himself, and most importantly, the Indian freedom movement. Therefore, a critical influence on the literature of the law in the colonies was the resistance in India to the same oppression by the same imperial government, enforcing the same punishments against the same demands of dignity and freedom. The literature of the colonies thus included not only the words of the law, because many of you know that we literally applied all the major Indian statutes in East Africa, the Penal Code, Criminal Procedure Code, Contract Act, Transfer of Property Act were taken in toto and applied. But not only the words of the statutes, but even the words of the literature of the law we took from India. All this was in addition to what the colonies generated through the variables of its own politics, their own politics, whether they were settlers' interests, Britain's strategic interests, mining interests, tangled subjective racial factors. But not only did we share the oppression that India experienced, but we also shared the inspiration that India found within itself. First, from the colonies, one of the best literary responses in the colonies was by Robert Sobukwe, the president of the Pan-African Congress in South Africa, a lawyer who spent 6 years in Robben Island prison. And he summed it up in his mitigation speech in May 1960, weeks after Sharpeville, on a charge of incitement. And this is what he said: "The history of the human race has been a struggle for the removal of oppression, and we would have failed had we not made our contribution. We are glad we made it." These are words that remind us that the correction of injustice is not an event, but a process, mostly a long process. And such words help us persevere in that long task, even when we think sometimes that it cannot succeed. So Sobukwe's words reiterate that perseverance is the duty of all lawyers and of all persons fighting against injustice of any kind. Of this same duty, I will give you another such memorable exchange, not in the written literature as yet. By the year 2000, the struggle against oppression and the denial of the rule of law in Kenya was in its 22nd year. By contrast, the ANC had been in its 34th year since 1960 and the Sharpeville massacre. While I was abroad for a brief respite, I met Albie Sachs, the ANC freedom fighter, lawyer, and writer. By then, South Africa was free since 1994, and he was a judge of the Constitutional Court of South Africa. We had been colleagues together, teaching at the University of Dar es Salaam 30 years earlier. So I asked him, how did you all deal with this? We do not have a major party like the ANC. We are individuals, we are divided. Should I consider stopping? He thought and then said, do you think you are doing right? I shrugged and murmured, yes. He answered, then what reason is there to stop? With that, I returned home to Kenya, refreshed. Individuals get tired. Right does not. Our task is to pursue right till it is re-established. This is what memorable words do. This is what the literature of the law does. They restore. They also enable us by their example. And one of the most memorable and powerful examples of such literature is the statement, again in South Africa, of Nelson Mandela, made from the dock on 20th April 1964 in the Rivonia trial for sabotage, held in Pretoria. And it ended with these justly famous and oft-quoted words. He said, during my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I'm prepared to die. These words went all round the world and spoke to all who believed in freedom and dignity. They affected the next generation in South Africa directly. They ignited the school children of Soweto in 1970, right till freedom came. They had the resonance of other literary words. And by now, you must be thinking of what was being thought of in Paris in another masterpiece. Along those streets, the death carts rumble hollow and harsh. 6 tumbrils carry the day's wine to La Guillotine. As he mounts the guillotine, Sidney Carton also looks at the same thing, at that same horizon that Mandela was looking at. Then Carton's last thoughts are, it is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known. But I must confess that to us in the diaspora on our continent, those courtroom words in Pretoria put even the incomparable Dickens in the shade, because the choice in Pretoria was the same choice that millions of others there, including members of the Indian diaspora in South Africa, facing in South Africa at that time. And Mandela's words were live literature to us. But this was not the only unsworn statement in court that impacted on the Indian diaspora in the colonies. An earlier diasporan generation had been equally indelibly marked and moved when in 1942, another lawyer, also accused of sedition, also made that a statement. It was at Gorakhpur, in his trial within prison itself. At the end of the prosecution case, in his 9th trial and his imminent further years in prison, after refusing to plead to charges, saying it was his privilege to spread disaffection against British rule in India, Jawaharlal Nehru said, "I stand before you, sir, as an individual being tried for certain offenses against the state. You are a symbol of that state. But I am something more than an individual also. I too am a symbol at the present moment, a symbol of India. It is not me that you are seeking to judge and condemn, but rather the hundreds of millions of the people of India. And that is a large task, even for a proud empire. Perhaps it may be that though I'm standing before you on my trial, it is the British Empire itself that is on its trial before the bar of the world. 7 times I've been tried and convicted by British authority in India, and many years of my life lie buried within prison walls. An 8th time or a 9th and a few more years make little difference. But it is no small matter what happens to India and her millions of sons and daughters. That is the issue before me, and ultimately, that is the issue before you, sir." The Indian independence movement was a critical influence on the mind of every single one of the millions of overseas Indians. Like all literature, its voice for freedom and its defiance of unjust power steeled hundreds of millions in India and several millions in the diaspora abroad. There are now close to over 20 million Indians in the diaspora. And just a personal, as within a very few years, we were moved by the words of the tryst with destiny. Now, why do lawyers use such words? Most of these accused persons, both lawyers and others, were all speaking in ordinary courtrooms where the exchanges normally proceed with the prosaic vocabulary of statutes and penal codes. But lawyers, poets, and writers share tools, words. T.S. Eliot's warnings in Burnt Norton about the fickle nature of this equipment cautions lawyers as much as they do poets. But lawyers know the uses of words, and most of all, they know the power of words. Then the justice of their cause and the injustice of the oppression that their client suffers move them to shape other words, not found in the statute. Lawyers then shape their words to move others, and regardless of the dangers to themselves, to give conviction afresh to the minds and courage to the hearts of unjustly accused persons, as well as to the millions under the tyranny that they all cannot as yet immediately bring to an end. This is a literary ability. These words, memorable words, do etch themselves and did etch themselves on the minds of all the peoples of Africa, including the Indian diaspora there. These are examples of how and why we share the same inspiration, because we shared the same oppression. And as past history and present newspapers show us, because the oppression of one person anywhere is the oppression of all humankind, and because such inspiration to one is the inspiration to all humankind. To this shared oppression, of course, were also added the particular political circumstances of the colonies. But in that context too, you will see we shared much. So let me turn to the political context of British justice in India, and therefore of colonial justice under which we of the diaspora lived. This context was set in India, but applied to all the Indian Ocean colonies. There were two sharp divisions in the ideologies of the Raj. They were reflected in both the law and in the literature of the law. These two ideologies reflected the divisions within the British people themselves, whether they were living in India, in Britain, or in the British colonies. Thomas Metcalfe, American historian, in his perceptive book called The Ideologies of the Raj, sets these out. And the first is, I quote, "The ideology of liberalism with its optimistic assumption that India could be transformed on a British model. Many of this ideology's claims still remained embedded in the larger currents of imperial thought and practice, for they expressed cherished British values, the idea of equality, for instance. Despite the contesting ideology, this idea of equality could not be explicitly repudiated." This approach was reflected in Macaulay's famous minute on Indian education, the policies of, say, Viceroys Canning, Ripon, Reading, and most prominently in the Queen's Proclamation of 1858 and the promises made therein of equal treatment and equal opportunities. Under this approach, in due course of time, Indians would be able to rule themselves with British values and follow British governmental systems and methods. And therefore, in time, the Raj would end its trust and hand over India's government to Indians. The second is the opposite approach. Metcalfe posits this as the ideology of difference. This held that the difference between British values, ways of life, religion, and aspirations was so many and so irremediable that Indians could not become like the British. Therefore, there would not be any appropriate moment to hand over the government of India to Indians. The Raj was thus to continue into any foreseeable future. British government in India, this approach held, had come about by and was thus based on military conquest, on force, and therefore must be held whenever necessary by force. And its cultural defense was the inflexible color bar. If there were a challenge to British control, these challenges must be suppressed by decisive and deterrent force. Political changes must remain at the absolute discretion of the British. Examples of this approach were the Rowlatt Acts and, of course, Jallianwala Bagh, the Salam's Order, the Crawling Order, the Amritsar trials, Dyer's statements at his inquiry, O'Dwyer's justifications of the massacre, the political and financial support in British civil and military ranks in both India and England. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre was not an accident, nor was it an ad hoc response to an unarmed meeting. It was actively planned and executed in furtherance of the ideological view of difference and of its aim that the Raj would be and would remain indefinite white supremacist rule in India. Our relevance here is that in this contesting set of ideologies, the diaspora was a critical factor, surprisingly. The contending approaches did not work out their differences only in India. Metcalfe points out this key fact. I quote, "This controversy between the two ideologies found expression most prominently in the movement of Indian traders and indentured laborers to an array of British colonial territories around the globe. That is why the diaspora had a critical impact on the shape of and the outcome of the Indian freedom movement. Now the influence and impact is coming in the reverse direction. And therefore, the challenge in Kenya for equality of Indians in Kenya had a great impact on the Indian freedom movement and moved it from Swaraj, which was home rule and dominion status under the British Crown, and moved it to Purna independence, which was independence as a republic. These contrasting ideologies defined the responses of Indians in India as well as in the African colonies. And therefore, how we viewed our experience of the machinery of the law was common both in India and in the colonies. And this is why we share this literature of the law. I turn then to the question, why do lawyers lean to literary expression? I believe that our work takes us there. Our work is learned persuasion. And we know that literature and fine literary ability is also about persuasion through words. It isn't, if I may clarify, it is not about the judge being moved by an advocate's fine literary ability to Coleridge's willing suspension of disbelief. That would be not only unliterary, it would be unprofessional. Our foundation remains in law. But even judges, not only advocates, even judges need this literary input. Their own decisions also need learning and also need persuasion. Persuasion because judges' decisions need legitimacy from the public. This is the purpose of the principle of the open court, and not least from the parties in the case itself. Every conscientious judge in difficult decisions particularly questions himself or herself even after they are pronounced in court. Another purpose that brings us to literary expression is revealed in the literature of the law, and it is this. For example, the unsworn statements of Nehru and Mandela have long been acknowledged to be a part of the literature of the common law. But the literary words and the literary sensibility also had a lawyer's function. They fulfill an important courtroom task of a good defense because they define the defense to an unjust prosecution. To put it more correctly, they expose the injustice of the prosecution and thereby redefine the unjust trial. And all lawyers will tell you that a defense in an unjust case must not accept the prosecution's construct of the case. The memorable statements by Nehru and Mandela thus showed the many tasks of the literature of the law. They redefined their prosecutions and trials. Secondly, they brought the aims of the movements into public and worldwide focus. They did even more than that. Thirdly, they also gave inspiration to the millions of their followers and others by confirming through these words and actions in court that their struggles as individuals embodied also the struggles of those millions, that they as individuals were suffering the same deprivations that those millions suffered. When lawyers have an understanding of events and law and literature and ideas, they can change unjust and false show trials into platforms for the recall to the ideals of legal and social justice. and for the endurance of just struggles. To do this, they draw upon the power of literature. Lawyers must remind themselves that in a criminal defense, though, literature is a powerful additive, but not at the expense of forgetting the law or the accused person's safety. This last consideration always comes first. There's a further reason why literature and law come together in the courtroom at certain moments. It is when the accused is really addressing another court, the court of public opinion, a court which is outside the walls of the dim room in which the person's being tried and the judge is sitting. Fidel Castro's famous courtroom speech of 1953, "History will absolve me," was not being addressed to the judges in the courtroom. Their verdict was a foregone conclusion. He was addressing the public, his followers outside the court, and also the future of his country should he not survive. That is also what Nehru was saying. These statements directly affected generations in the colonies. I give another example. In the 1952 Defiance campaign in South Africa, Mandela was the president of the campaign, like the chairman of the campaign. But at that time, at the most important public general meeting, Mandela was in prison. His speech had to be read by another official. And now I quote from an account of it. Mandela's stirring presidential address was read on his behalf in his absence, and the committee entitled it and its theme, "No Easy Walk to Freedom." Where did that phrase come from? And the author says the phrase was taken from one of Nehru's books. So that again and again, we draw inspiration from each other. And it is important to realize that Gandhi was not the only example which Africa and the whole world drew inspiration from. Nehru's success in the political arena matched Gandhi's success in the political arena, and they drew. An area of literary expression is not one that is always nice. It is not only the defense and the oppressed who use literary skills to protect themselves. Oppressors too use literary skills to make repression seem less, or to legitimize it by the use of euphemisms. A favorite alternative to tyranny, the removal of the rule of law, is a word that we in Kenya, and sadly you in India, are all too familiar with. It's called emergency. When an oppressor misuses literary skills to operate outside the rule of law, yet through law, it is not to create memorable words or literature of the law. These redesigned names are to cover up state violence and state crime and the deliberate disregard of all human rights. Literary efforts then pull away the mask, and such literary efforts contrast the pomp and circumstance which misleads with the reality of people's sufferings. African writers of the immediate post-independence generation in the diasporan countries also found their encounters with the law distasteful. Kenya's world-renowned author Ngugi wa Thiong'o devoted a whole book to his detention without trial. It was simply called Detention. And the examples which his experience, giving many examples, sets out this impression that the judiciary was only in the colonies another arm of the executive. And this impression was also reflected in Nigerian author Chinua Achebe's path-breaking 1957 novel, Things Fall Apart. Although set in Nigeria, it typically reflects the experience of all Anglophone countries in Africa. In relation to this, another example is an example from Kenya. It is an even more extreme example of the ideology of difference, the British ideology of difference, where legal proceedings took place in 1915 in Kenya, involving Indian diasporans there. That was the second year of the First World War, and the Germans were fighting the British in East Africa. And the Kenyan Railway, which was a strategic passageway, was the target of German infiltration and raids upon the line. And in this context, the British suffered many defeats. Despite British troops being there, the Germans were destroying railways, the tracks, wagons, etc. And in this aspect, in this process, there were Indians who were railway staff on ground, my own grandfather driving locomotives at that time on that line during this period, the fuel suppliers who were Indian contractors and subcontractors. The British Army subcommanders arrested Indians and charged them with aiding and abetting the Germans, which was one way of explaining those defeats. The two of them were first tried by a military court and sentenced to death by being shot. Two of them were taken out immediately and were shot at Voi. That account is set out by one of the survivors. The next week, 5 others were brought in, and there the same charges, but 2 of them were charged with being in possession of seditious literature, which was the Hindustan Gadar, published in California. And there, they were then brought from Voi, which was the town where they were tried, to Mombasa, and one of them was then hanged in public in Mombasa town. The survivor sets this out, and perhaps in question time, may I read part of this? It's another example of the experience of those who saw the judiciary, whether under martial law or under the civil process, to be no more than an extension of the executive. And so, in this process, these instances from South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya, and there are many more in our colonies literature, are only a very few of the powerful invocations of visible injustice and racist mistreatment that may be found. They are all literary mirrors to popular impressions. And in this, I therefore conclude by placing before you another classic of the literature of the law, because it best summarizes the experience of the law suffered by the Indian diaspora in the former African colonies. In the well-known case of Liversidge and Anderson in the House of Lords in 1942 during the war, Atkins said, "I view with apprehension the attitude of judges who on a mere question of construction, when face to face with claims involving the liberty of the subject, show themselves more executive-minded than the executive. The Indian diaspora in the former colonies emphatically shared that apprehension. Thank you.
May I request the Commodore to take over the session, but if he wishes me to field the questions, which I am sure there are plenty of, and then I hand it back to him, is that something you would like me to do, Shrikant?
Yeah, Professor Nilufer, please go ahead.
Okay. So, Pheroze, Kirti,
Yes.
you can put the spotlight on Pheroze again, because I'll just be reading out the questions. The spotlight is on you, Pheroze.
Yes.
We have a lot of thank yous. We have got a lot of thank yous. We don't really have too many questions, but if anybody would like to, we have got some, okay. We have got from Kanya Padiachi, who Pheroze knows, who is
Yes.
from Durban, South Africa, from the University of Technology there and part of the Gandhi Trust. She is just saying that she's really finding, she found your presentation very stimulating and informative. If Kanya would like to ask any questions, Kanya, because she was also saying they were having power cuts. I don't know if she is being cut off now. I think they're all overwhelmed by Pheroze's erudition and the classic lawyerly presentation of arguments, really. So there aren't too many questions, but I think there are only accolades, lots and lots of accolades, Pheroze, from everyone. And there is a question. There is a question from somebody called Anju Singh, who hasn't given her affiliation, but is asking, with the absence of leaders like Nehru and Mandela on the world stage, do you think lawyers of today can reflect the struggles of the common man? Woman as well, I guess.
Sure. Should I
Yes, please.
respond?
Yes, please.
I think that's an important question, because we must not be overwhelmed by the feeling that the struggle against injustice has been exhausted, that our efforts seem puny and inarticulate compared to these giants. Because injustice is a constant reflection of power. And it's consistently being pushed on to governmental processes in every country. And therefore, two things emerge. The response, the lawyer's tasks remain. Number two, no one ever thought after Gorakhpur that there would ever be the need for statements against injustice in India of the size that emerged during the emergency in 1975 to 77. And yet, because we do not find those expressions, literary expressions, legal the expressions of suffering put forward does not mean that they were not there, and does not mean that if we took a bit of trouble, we would not find them. In South Africa, the 1964, when Mandela gave uttered those famous words, there was still another 30 years of extraordinary suffering, or of incredible misuse of power by the apartheid government. And there were lawyers defending millions of people under the pass laws, under the Group Areas Act, under the Suppression of Communism Act, all sorts of. And therefore, it is very, very important. I said it's an important question because every year there are new lawyers joining the profession. There are new NGO workers joining the profession. There are new social service people entering their profession. And none of them should be intimidated by the fact that others spoke more articulately ahead of them. It is not us that make these words. It is the circumstances in which we find ourselves that forces us to find the right force with which to reject injustice. And when we do, when this moment occurs, people will find the words, all of them. And more than that, we are not there to create the literature of the law. We are there to defend individual persons who are being unjustly dealt with. And therefore, our concentration must be. And those words will come. They will come in different at moments which we are not expecting. And in fact, Eliot said, history deceives us. It gives where we are not expecting, and so on. And in that, it is the concentration that we must have on our task. And each and every lawyer carries within, each and every doctor, each and every social worker, each and every NGO person is carrying within her, within him, that spark which is saying, every journalist, which will bring about those words. Do not hesitate. Do not think that that was the end of it. There have been beautiful words and heroic actions and brave actions for the last 3,000, 4,000, 6,000 years. And there will be then again another succeeding millennia where this will happen again. Never be put off, but draw inspiration from that past wealth.
Thank you, Pheroze. There is a question from a student of law, but before that, I would like to tell you, I don't know whether we did at the beginning, that there are some lawyers, faculty from the University of Abuja, Nigeria. Professor Stierstoffer's contacts with that university. We have got Peter Schneck from his Law and Literature project as well. They are with us, as are many others. But there is this question, they don't really have any questions, but there is a question from Sheikh Shah Nawaz, who is a student of the Government Law College, Mumbai, who is asking, what is your opinion, meaning Mr. Nowrojee's opinion, regarding the legal professionals in the field of social welfare?
The Nawaz, it is more and more accepted that our legal constitutions are not only to bring legal justice through our profession, but also social justice. So, for example, the Kenyan Constitution has as part of the national objects of the Constitution includes social justice. It is there in the preamble, it is there in the Fundamental Freedoms chapter, it is there in that chapter in the remedies that we are giving the remedies of the writs, prohibitions, certiorari, mandamus, etc., for not only the solution of an case between two people or one person in the state, but also for social justice for the whole community. Therefore, if lawyers are to do their job more comprehensively, then an understanding of social justice is key. The Indian Constitution has the directives, and these directives embody social justice. The Supreme Court of India established a breakthrough in the common law, jurisprudence with public interest litigation. The Supreme Court of India established through Palkhiwala on the bench, at the bar, and judges like Mr. Justice Khanna on the bench, the concept of the basic structure. Why do we do that? Why don't we simply say laws are man-made and we should accept that they can be changed by men and women and parliament? No, we don't. We say there are certain objects which cannot be changed even by the amending power. And that is a statement of social justice, that this is what the Indian freedom movement was. And this is what we have to preserve, and preserve in Kenya, and preserve in different parts of the world. And it's always under attack. And therefore, the aspect of social aims is a key part of legal studies. It's a key part of legal practice, and it is a key part of legal decision-making. So Nawaz, no hesitation, that is your aim. And let me add one more thing. To do all this, you need to be a good lawyer first, and then apply that to these aims. You cannot send a cricket India team for the World Cup and say we are bursting to do social justice and our cricket team is the best social justice believer, and then get innings batting performance in 2 figures and a bowling thing which brings you no wickets. You need to be good lawyers, we need to be good social servants, and those tasks are unending. You will be reading and writing and lawyering for the next 40, you are a student now, you will still be in our profession 40 years from now. And in those 40 years, don't fear if you're not in the anthology of literature of the law. It is enough if you are satisfied that you did your best and you spoke. What is the word advocate? An advocate is a person who is vocal on behalf of. You must have finished saying everything that a client can say for himself or herself. So that's a lot of hard work. Always look, not just at satisfying that you've exhausted the statute or the case law. You will constantly say, what is the issue here? And there is a legal issue, but go beyond that, and you will find that social issue, and focus on both of these to make your legal skills achieve what your social aims are.
Thank you, Pheroze. Thank you. The questions are now pouring in. So even though I'm sure the young lawyers really, really appreciated what you had to say, if you could be a little briefer, because we have to hand over the Zoom platform to the university at some point in time. But there's a question from Armin coming up. There is a question from Kinjal. There's a question from Sujata, and there's a question from Kanya. So Armin first. Armin is going to raise her own question. Kirti, can you highlight Armin, please? Armin.
Hi, Armin.
Sound.
Hello.
Yes, better, but no sound.
I can hear you, Armin.
Okay, then it's fine.
No, we can't.
Oh.
Armin, can you type a question? In the meantime, we can get somebody else to, Pheroze can attend to somebody. No. Can you type your question? Can you hear her, Pheroze?
Not now.
Not now. Armin, if you can type your question, in the meantime, Pheroze can take up another question. There is a question from a student of English literature, Pheroze,
Yes.
doing her MA with us. And she says, what would you say are the current active topics? She's talking about any possible topics of research in terms of international relations between India and Africa. Between India and Africa, what according to you are interesting topics of research which can be done by students at the Mumbai University, for instance? I know it's a little off your topic, but...
Yes, not so much off as I'm not sure whether the student would be interested in a particular area or is open to it.
An interdisciplinary kind of
thank you.
Literature.
I think that what is coming across, there are two areas. One is to see why we are seeing such a huge surge towards the acceptance of the misuse of power. And secondly, why we fought for 100 years plus to create a concept of India which is being contradicted by what may be popular. And why is this also taking place, for example, in the US, but particularly on our continent, so that we then look there not to identify the problem, but to look for possible solutions. And may I say that literature plays no small part in that. It is a constant help and a constant way of persevering in that subject.
Pheroze, thank you for that. There is a question before Armin tries again. There is a question. She wants to be heard, not just seen in form of a question. Okay, so we'll wait for Armin to be heard. But there's a question from, two questions. One is from Sujata Pawar, who is the principal of one of the law colleges in Satara, I think. I don't know which university they are affiliated to. But that is asking about your opinion on legal education provided in regional language. That is her question.
Yes.
And then there is another question from Kania Padyachi. If I could give you both the questions, and we could move on to Armin. And that could be the last question before Klaus, before first the Commodore takes over, winds up your session, and then Klaus speaks. Kania's question is, she says to you, Pheroze, you raised the memory of Sobukwe and lifted him from the obscurity he was assigned to pre- and post-democratic South Africa. Comment. Comment.
Yes.
So there are two of them. And then there is the gentleman from Nigeria who is just saying that he is he's happy that we have acknowledged his presence. It was me actually, sir, Professor Niloufar Barucha, acknowledging your presence. But whoever it is, we are happy to have you on board. That's all he had to say. So then after these two questions, Armin.
Certainly. May I take Sujata's question first? Sujata, let me, not only is Bombay University my old university, but I was delighted to hear that you're based in Satara because I did my secondary schooling in Panchgani. And so I'm familiar with there, the whole beautiful area there. Is regional language an important thing? Indubitably, because it is important that in many areas out of the urban areas, the regional language is the language of the person seeking assistance in a courtroom. And so it is important that counsel understands the client. We tend to concentrate on whether the judge is understanding us as counsel. But the most important thing is for us to understand what is the sense of injustice that is moving this matter and bringing it into the courtroom. So do proceed. And importantly, again, that the regional language must, the command of the regional language must reflect the enormous, great literature that the language draws upon, so that the literary efforts are supporting and to ensure that if this is done, eventually judges understand the inarticulate person before them even deeper and can intervene even without the language of the court, either Hindustani or Hindi or English. So this is an area to push forward with. My total support for that. May I turn to Kanya's question on Sobukwe? Kanya, absolutely, it is an injustice for Sobukwe's memory not to be honored as much. I'm glad to see slowly there's a street in Cape Town, there's a street now in Johannesburg, but certainly in Kimberley, knowing. But we are not paying enough attention to core ideas. And when we don't do that, simply because we think, no, he's not ANC, therefore we should not glorify him, it is important if ANC brings out as South African heroes the statements that Sobukwe was making and speaking. And your best reason to do that is because the apartheid nationalists saw him as such a danger to themselves that they passed the Sobukwe rule, which was in effect, the Sobukwe clause was in effect a license to put away this one man indefinitely. All that the minister had to do was to say, I extend the time of his imprisonment for another 3 years. That's all. There was no trial, no reason given, no opportunity to respond, nothing. So Sobukwe is a personal hero in a pantheon of great people in the South African struggle. And I'm glad that you felt that you found some resonance in that. Thank you.
Pheroze, the question from Armin.
Yes.
Has typed it out and sent it now because I don't think she's getting the sound across.
Okay.
The question is, and I think there are a couple of other questions, but we will keep them because we could send it to you by email if you are fine with that.
Yes.
And they could, because there are so many questions pouring in, we won't have time for everything.
Sure.
The Commodore has to wind up your session, plus Klaus has to also give his remarks. So
certainly.
Armin's question. She says a lawyer is supposed to represent his or her client to the best of his or her ability. But on the case of a prosecutor representing the state, would you say it behoves him or her not to prosecute wrongly or falsely and to advise the state accordingly rather than blindly follow the diktat of the state? Wow, now that is something.
That's the present question.
Yes,
yeah.
just Armin's, and then we will move on
certainly.
to Commodore again.
I think that the Defense Counsel and the Prosecution Counsel share certain professional guidelines and duties. It is the duty of the defense to accept a brief and to do it to the best of his or her ability. But there is a check. You cannot defend by any means. You cannot defend by unethical means. You have these guidelines set up. Now, the same thing happens in the prosecution. The person is a person speaking on behalf of the state. There are two decisions that are important. Firstly, that there is a check. Does the Director of Public Prosecutions or the Solicitor General or the Attorney General or Advocate General satisfied that there is a case to be presented? He or she is under a duty not to accept the prosecution of a case because it is a political demand or a request from the executive. You do say, you point out that the prosecutor then must advise, indeed, as must the defense also. But the prosecution should set out that advice and put it on the file. He is a public servant, she is a public servant, and there are ways in which the requirement of a superior officer which is wrongful can be resisted. It must be set out, the reasons for it must be set out, and then it must be placed forward. It must be put on the file. The superior can say, I see this, but nevertheless, I direct you to proceed. The prosecuting junior officer must then proceed and must then proceed to do the best he or she can. But it is just as a defense cannot use unlawful means, a prosecutor is not under the common law under a duty to persecute till there is a verdict of guilty. The duty of a prosecutor set out in the common law is to place before the court impartially and with all strength all the material that is relevant to a conviction before the court. A prosecutor cannot say this person is clearly out to destroy the security of the state or to harm people, etc., etc. That is not the function of a prosecutor. Although, just as we in defense often transgress, many prosecutors do say that. But you'll find that where there are compliant judges looking for a signal from the Attorney General, what they really are looking for is a signal from the minister or higher up. And when they see that signal in the form of a condemnation or of the accused person personally or of his political party or of his newspaper or of his opinions, then the magistrate or the judge says, aha, I know where I have to find. So there are limits, if properly done, on both sides, and the transgressions are on both sides. But we are not talking of the injustice of a particular case. We are now seeing the injustice of a system where the criminal process goes awry.
Thank you, Pheroze. Armin, you could maybe take it up with Pheroze personally or through email whenever, if you want to carry this further. May I request the Commodore to please give his concluding remarks to this lecture, so that we can then move on to the valedictory remarks by Professor Stierstoffer. Professor, the Commodore, please.
Thank you. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lovely. I think, there's after such a talk, there's not really much you can say. As Niloufar said, accolades were just pouring in. I think, we all agree it was a luminous talk, and I think he sketched a very grand sort of canvas and filled it with very vibrant colors. I mean, he moved across 3 continents, from Sydney Carton and Charles Dickens to Mandela in Africa to Nehru in Gorakhpur, and sort of set out, so to say, the ethical framework or what we call as the grand strategic framework in terms of how law and literature sort of come together, and how they come in with even more sort of vehemence or robustness when law is used to condemn unjust law or as an act of defiance. I think so. He brought out about the literature of law. I think the phrase he used, which I like very much, was he says it enabled hope. And that I think is a function of all that it did. It enabled hope, and he called it live literature. Of course, he sketched that to independence movements in colonial Africa, indeed to India, and to how after a while both sort of fed off each other and fed into each other. But what I like was that he didn't sort of just keep himself at the grand ideas level. He also talked of the very, utilitarian aspect of it when he said that it is about learned persuasion, that it is not an end in itself, it's a part of learned persuasion. And he brought out, I think, a very important point when he says that judges also seek legitimacy for their judgments, and therefore they have to be convinced, and that is done through these excellent legal arguments. At the same time, I think in response to certain questions, he emphasized that this is not about literature, that the idea is about being good lawyers and being true to your legal calling and not desiring to find, as he said, a place in the shelf of anthologies of literature. So he was trying to bring the focus back by using both cricketing and other example to say that if you are sort of good in your profession, then the other things sort of add to it. At a personal level, of course, I was quite taken up by his reference to Thomas Metcalfe, because Metcalfe's works talk a lot about the imperial connections between India and colonial Africa. And his second book or subsequent book, Imperial Connections, actually begins with how Halford Mackinder, coming down from Mount Kenya, makes a seamless transition from the Bwana country to the Sahib country, as he says, and how these identities meld themselves very well in East Africa. At the same time, I was a little uncomfortable with Metcalfe's sort of very scholarly exposition that Indians were somewhere between the colonials and the colonized, that they actively took part sometimes as the colonizing entity. And therefore, I was very happy to hear Pheroze talk about how a whole lot of Indians fought for the colonized people in Africa. And I was particularly taken up by his description of people who were shot and hanged to death in World War I. Not only it sort of gives a little bit more fillip to me in my study of World War I in Africa, which I've been pursuing for a few years, but interesting that there were people actually shot, Indians who were shot for aiding enemy effort. So it shows that after a while, I guess we were very much a part of the colonial struggle, and we contributed intellectually and otherwise. So that's a sort of very grand summing up the narrative. As a sort of chairman's prerogative, if I can take 1 minute more and bring back a little bit of my favorite hobby horse that I have been riding in the last few years, which is to try and see the interface that happened between a newly independent India and still the colonized African nations, because that period between 47 and the 60s were again sort of exciting times. And there I go back, I have discussed this with Pheroze a couple of times, to how the presence of Indian Navy ships. I mean, remember, Pheroze brought in about colonial times when the army was used for colonial expeditions. But after independence, the Indian naval ships now represented a new India, so to say. And there are some wonderful memoirs of Indian Navy officers who say that the diasporic Indians would come and sit for long times on the decks of ship, sort of recollecting their connection with India, with the mother country, so to speak. And you know, the Navy ships gave a very palpable physical connect to people in diaspora. But interestingly, it was not limited to diaspora alone. There is a case of Jomo Kenyatta stepping on board the INS Delhi in 1951. And the captain of the ship records in his memoirs that Kenyatta was a guest. He spent some time in the captain's cabin. And while leaving, he told the Indian Navy captain, he says, "Thank you for having me as your guest captain. The last time I embarked a British Navy cruiser was as a member of the chipping party." So in a sense, the newly independent India brought in, let's say, certain different aspects to this interaction, which, to answer the question of that lady, what are the new areas that we could research? So probably these are areas we could research. How did these interactions happen post-independent India? And my own thesis on defense diplomacy between India and Africa suggests, I mean, I'm not talking of gunboat diplomacy or other measures. My thesis is how the armed forces and security concerns can be sort of harmonized in benign ways. So that I offer as some of the things that could be studied by scholars in future. It remains for me, on behalf of all of you, to thank Pheroze Nowrojee for this outstanding, memorable talk, and just convey our collective thanks and gratitude for the very beautiful way in which he set it up, and my thanks to all the other authorities. should I hand over to Professor Taj from Münster?
Yeah, Klaus, before you speak, can I just take a minute or so to say how wonderfully pleased we are, not just with the fact that our second lecture, which is the common on the common platform of the CoHaB Indian Diaspora Center, with the Münster University and the Department of Law, we are three organizers of both these events, has gone so wonderfully well. We were flagged off beautifully by our Vice Chancellor last time when Armin spoke. This time we had the Commodore, and the Commodore not only in his introductory comments, but just now while summing up Pheroze's lecture has, I mean, it's been wonderful. Both of you were wonderful. It was great. And we look forward to roping in the Commodore for individual lectures more often, not just as chairing the session. And after Klaus's talk, we have a formal vote of thanks, but I can't restrain myself from feeling very proud about Pheroze Nowrojee, not just as our choice of speaker, but to let in people on a secret which we don't share that often, that we are first cousins, and his mother and my mother were sisters. His the eldest sister, mine the youngest sister. So it's a family contact, the diasporan part of our family, as well as this wonderful internationally known lawyer, human rights person, literature, speaker, excellent. Klaus, over to you.
Thank you, Nilu.
Thank you, Nilufer. And I suppose the best advice to a valedictory speaker here is to be brief after such a wonderful talk, and I will follow my own advice. So I have just 2 or 3 things to say. First of all, Commodore, many thanks, and I won't preempt the vote of thanks following me, but many thanks for giving such a beautiful frame to Pheroze's wonderful lecture. I want to say 2 things. One is that we are really privileged, and I join Nilufer there in this view, in the 2 first speakers we had in this lecture series, because both of them, Armin Vandriwala and now you, Pheroze Nowrojee, are really people who embody, you know, in a living person what we try to study. So in a sense, we're also studying you, being both lawyers and authors. And it is, of course, a particular privilege to, you know, get a piece of your minds in a lecture like this, and see how this comes together from people who practice both sides we are trying to grapple with. This is, in a sense, a privileged position the 2 of you are in, and Pheroze, you are in, because you see aspects of the 2 spheres which we will never as directly be able to get hold of. So thank you. This is the very brief thing I have to say, Pheroze, for letting us in on, apart from family secrets, on the very exciting subject and interdisciplinary view you brought to us in such an enlightening way. This is much appreciated, and I'm glad, as I know from Kirti, she just repeated it, that this will be on YouTube, so many more people, I'm sure, will share in this insight. And I'm glad we have this kind of rostrum and platform to make our efforts, our research efforts, known to others, and to draw in more and more people on this important subject. So again, many thanks, Pheroze, for doing this. I do hope we can cajole you into other events like this in the future. It would be a privilege to stay connected. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The other point, and there again, Pheroze, you are an impersonation of what I'm going to say, is that one of our strategic aims is to triangulate geographically what we are doing. And I think this is happening better and better. We had this long-standing research relationship between the universities of Münster and Mumbai for many, many years now. And somehow we have begun to reach out to Africa for various ways, and I won't, give you a history of it. For me personally, and I thank Nilufer and Sridhar for, really putting me on the track, is first of all, of course, we walk in the footsteps of Gandhi. And for me, on the research side, I have just been writing on Gandhi in this respect from a law and literature perspective. He gives us the lead in so many ways. And he's done that triangulation so beautifully for us. So in a sense, let's follow Gandhi, I'd say, intellectually and in many other ways. The other thing, of course, is that talking about diaspora, Europe, India, you immediately reach Africa. It's the obvious place to go, and I'm very glad that we have been able to link up to several universities in Africa now, specifically to the University of Abuja. So very nice to have people joining from there. Also to Nnamdi Azikiwe University in Abuja, in Nigeria. I'm not sure if anyone could join today, but these are first steps. We have partners in South Africa, and now we have you talking to us from Kenya, from your background, Pheroze. So this was, in our attempted trajectory of research efforts, a particular boon, what you are impersonating for us, this linkage from India to Africa, and of course with the European knowledge you carry. So thank you again, thank you everyone, and I conclude here with the hope that we have many more opportunities in a widening network in this triangular way. Thank you very much for organizing this, Nilufer, and for Pheroze again for giving us this wonderful lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Klaus. Thank you very much. And Kirti?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so what is on the agenda now?
Now we have the formal vote of thanks.
Your vote of thanks. And after that, of course, we are not going away immediately. And actually, we are very, very, very grateful for the Zoom platform. It's been a blessing.
Yes.
The University of Mumbai providing this to us, and our Vice Chancellor very promptly approving all our requests for using the Zoom platform, and we are going to use it more and more now. So that's an absolute blessing. And of course, even though our Pro-Vice Chancellor isn't here with us today, I'm sure we can count, as Dr. Varadi Rajeshri has already said, we can count on his blessings and support as well. So over to you, Kirti, and we won't go away. Anybody wants to stay on and chat, most welcome. Kirti.
I would like to start by thanking Advocate Pheroze Nowrojee for such a delightful lecture. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you.
My pleasure, sir. I would then like to thank Commodore Shrikant Kestur for making time out of his busy schedule. I'm sure he's busy all the time, but thank you so much for being with us throughout the lecture and giving us your valuable insights.
Thank you. Thanks.
Professor Stierstoffer, thank you again for your valedictory address, and thank you so much for this initiative that you have started at Münster and extended to us, and all your colleagues who could join us today from Germany. Professor Varadi, I suppose she has left because she had some other meeting to attend today. But
No, I am here. Kirti,
I'm sorry, I couldn't see you. I'm sorry, madam.
Yeah.
But thank you for your collaboration, your and the Department of Law for collaborating.
Yeah, Kirti, I wish to personally thanks to Pheroze for a wonderful lecture, Pheroze. It was
Yes.
excellent and memorable lecture you delivered.
Thank you,
Personally.
Professor.
Yeah.
Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah.
I would then like to thank Dr. Shrivar Mangai, Director UCC, and Mr. Rohit, who actually helped us set up this Zoom platform for today's lecture. He was with us for the first couple of minutes to settle us in. So thank you, Rohit. Dr. Sachin Labde, who has been... Sorry?
I'll need my coffee in 5 minutes.
Yes, who is this?
Carry on.
Yeah, Dr. Sachin Labde, who's been in the background helping me by being the co-host for this platform. Thank you so much, sir, for your continuous support for this. And all our invited guests from India and abroad, thank you so much for making time today at you are in different time zones, but all of...
Please, if you could mention all our whole CoHaB group which has joined us in
Yes, the whole CoHaB group from abroad who are in different time zones but have made the time to be here with us today. And last but not the least, all the participants who could attend today's lecture and for all their questions and comments and their active participation, CoHaB IDC would like to thank everyone.
Kirti,
Thank you.
special thanks to our law students, LLM students for their active participation.
Yes, yes,
Even
definitely.
PhD students participated
All the
and principals
participants,
of law
yes.
colleges.
Yes.
Because nowadays lectures are going on and in spite of their schedule, they joined our program.
Rajashri, we appreciate that your
Yes.
students have
Yeah.
Yes, very active participation.
Yeah,
Thank you so
really.
much.
And Kirti, could you mention this will be available on YouTube?
Yes.
Our lecture is already available on YouTube. If you could say that.
Yes, yes. So the inaugural lecture given by Advocate Nowrojee has already been published on YouTube, and today's lecture too will be uploaded on YouTube, and it will be available on our YouTube channel CoHaB IDC, CoHaB Indian Diaspora Center. So we have a channel, and if you could access that, you will find the recordings of both the lectures there. Today's lecture will go up in a day or two, but it will be there before the end of next week.
Edited and put up.
Yes.
Yeah.
I, Shanawash would like to thank Mr. Pheroze Nowrojee sir and University of Mumbai. Thankful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then shall we declare this meeting closed? Wonderful second webcast, and I'm sure we are going to go from strength to strength and hope to have many more speakers from different parts of the world coming on our interdisciplinary international webcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.